Let's bring you some news from South America. Major street protests are expected on Wednesday in Venezuela. The opposition to President Nicolas Maduro gathers pace in spite of measures taken to stop dissent. The Supreme Court has acted to reduce the authority of the elected National Assembly. The Assembly, of course, controlled by the opposition. And Maduro has called the army onto the streets of Caracas ahead of a planned march on Wednesday. Let's get some analysis of the situation. Marco Vincenzino joins us, an international affairs commentator and director of Global Strategy Project. Marco, thanks for being with us. This situation in Venezuela, is it fair to say we're looking at a country on the edge?
Yeah, no, it's been on the edge for quite a while. It's an accumulation of steps. Maybe, possibly, some would argue this would be reaching a tipping point tomorrow. But then again, in the past, there have been protests. In 2014, there were large protests, and then eventually, over time, they just withered. But this time around may be a bit different because there's been accumulation of steps, particularly in recent times. The turning point, one would argue, probably is when the Supreme Court just recently tried to take all powers away from Congress. That move was quickly reversed, but the damage had been done. That was sort of the catalyst for the current wave of protests. And then obviously a few days later, when the banning of Abril, one of the opposition leaders, further exacerbated the situation. So we have here is, the president is obviously, Maduro is taking a very confrontational response, calling for a counter-march. And, 11 countries in Latin America have issued a joint communique basically calling for peaceful protests for both sides and quick elections to try to resolve this crisis. The Vatican is involved, steps at the OAS. So it's not just something internal. It's something regional. It's even going global to a large extent. So whether it's reaching a tipping point, one is not sure. But there's also the symbolism in the day tomorrow. The day marks the beginning of the Venezuelan independence struggle against Spain in the early 1800s. So there is that element of symbolism. But it's definitely a dangerous situation, one that, one would argue that possibly the government's trying to provoke violence from the opposition in order to use that as a pretext to crack down furthermore. Overall, Venezuela is, in essence, a one-party state. The government controls the executive, it controls, obviously, the courts, and the Congress has been defanged. So, to a large extent, we're talking about, somebody used the word dictatorship, but definitely a one-party state rule.
Is Maduro as unpopular as we're led to believe? Is the opposition so overwhelmingly against him?
But there's traditional bastions of Chavista support have started to turn against him a while ago. If you cannot provide the basic services, the shelves at the supermarket is somewhat empty. The health system is in a state of collapse. Venezuela has even asked for the UN for help there, tried to relieve the situation. So there is a certain core that still supports the government, but many of its traditional bastions of support over time have been turning against them. And his ratings are extremely low. But once again, he controls the armed forces, controls the security services, and as long as he has that, he has the military and others on the payroll, the opposition's ability, he tried in every constitutional way possible to try to remove him. Ultimately, if it comes to use of brute force, the government has proven in the past that it will use it.
Marco Vincenzino, thank you very much indeed for joining us.